So the first thing that I think we wanted to say, if you go back to that, I'm sorry, Tony, the one right before that, is that, one of the things that I think everyone's universal on is there's learning loss, there's social emotional loss. But I also think there were some skills that were learned during this pandemic, especially last spring, as we didn't know what was happening, and as our students have maybe more time sometimes to work on projects when they haven't been in school. And those are those skills that I know we call our portrait of graduate skills. Many of you have those same kinds of skills. We have never seen such communication and problem solving and courageous leadership and collaboration as we've seen during the pandemic. So I'm hoping that we all can get to a point too where we see, yes, there's quite a bit of loss, but there were some skills that were definitely gained, and that's great for kids. So if you go to the next one, Tony. The great thing about Kentucky is that we have such great, strong support from our state, from our governor, but we also have some autonomy to do things the way we see fit for our community, with our boards, with our SBDM councils. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about our story here in Fort Thomas, and how we have used quite a bit of our funds already, but how we're trying to bring together funds out of the general fund and other sources to try to address many of the losses that our students have. Back in the spring, we realized that our students had loss, that 2.5, 3 month time out of school. And our teachers came together to do planning both vertically, horizontally, and then also individually with students to sort of plan for what do we do next year. Unfortunately, even though there were gaps in curriculum, we had this year a lower number of days. We adopted the variable calendar and, spread out days. We knew we needed many more days for teacher planning, but that reduced our days from 178 to 165. So you have this sort of perfect storm, bad storm of fewer days, curricula that teachers couldn't get to, and then also, interruptions in student learning. And so we knew it was vitally important. Our board felt strongly that we wanted to get our students in school as much as possible, if it was at all possible. So a little bit of context about our district. We have 3,200 students, 5 schools, if you're not aware. And we have been in 5 days a week since September 17th, except, of course, those 3 weeks before Christmas break. And that was very important to our community and to our board. 92% of our students have gone in person the first semester and 96% the second semester. So you can see the numbers on how many chose remote. So from the beginning, kind of our key performance indicators or our parameters that we set back in May or June is that, if at all possible, following every single Healthy at School guideline, which includes 6-foot distancing, we wanted all students to have the opportunity to go to school every day. They didn't have to choose that. But parents could choose remote instruction. We also were very clear that any teachers with documented medical conditions, their doctor saying it's not okay for them to be at work, could teach remote, and that they would teach the remote students. And that also we were adamant that we were going to try as hard as possible for our teachers not to be responsible for both in-person and remote learning. Not that there would not be connections between the school and our students who chose remote learning, and not that our highly qualified Fort Thomas teachers wouldn't be teaching remote learning, but we just thought it was very hard to do both of those at the same time. So that's just a little context. Also need to let you know about our situation with free reduced lunch percentages, which of course have driven everything with ESSER funds. In 2014, the Fort Thomas board chose to leave the federal lunch program. The reason they chose to do that is because there was really a push for different kinds of food for our students and different kinds of opportunities. And they felt like the federal lunch program put too many restraints on there. Well, an unintended consequence of that was our free and reduced lunch percentage dramatically dropped. And that was because we went from that more audit system to a extensive paperwork documentation system. And so we had fewer students that maybe qualified, but also maybe fewer families who even attempted to qualify. So we just had charges all the way up to the end of the year. Maybe then they would get forgiven. So it's just not a really great system. And we have changed that for this year, but it was a little too late in the funding mechanism for ESSER funds. So as you can see, you can compare that to your own. We received $730,000 total ESSER 1, ESSER 2 gear for a 3,200 student school district. So we are having to look for other funding sources, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and are really looking forward to some set-aside funds. But this is what we spent our money on to kind of, have school this year and to continue. We're not sure what the summer brings, what the fall brings, but everything from thermal cameras, we had to, buy more software, hardware. We brought in some trailers in order to have 6-foot distancing in our elementary schools. Cleaning supplies, of course, everybody has that. Also warehouse to store those, warehouse to store all that extra furniture that had to come out of classrooms. We did a lot of beg, borrow desks around the state. Thank you for those of you who let us borrow those. And also we added a ton of outdoor furniture. You don't know how hard it was to find outdoor furniture in July and August in the middle of the pandemic. But I can definitely tell you about some of those sources. We went to Northern Ohio. So you can see that added up. In addition, all of our remote teachers who taught remotely, we had to have subs for their classrooms. I think we had 8 teachers who've been teaching remotely for our students in remote instruction. And so we had to pay for all year long subs for those teachers. Also, we have provided unlimited emergency days for our teachers and staff, and so that continues. We did add some additional staffing. We call them staff assistants, who are classified subs. And we also were looking forward to some FEMA money. So we thought we'd already submitted to FEMA when we found out that wasn't actually going to work. But our district was, very committed to trying to do whatever it took in order to bring our students back. So you can see, even with our ESSER funds, we did have a shortfall of about $360,000, which we're hopeful for additional funds or possibly FEMA or maybe some of the set-aside money. So that's our context, but Bill's going to talk a little bit about what have we found with learning loss. What are we doing to address that when we don't have this large pot of money? And then also Jamie will talk about social emotional support. So Tony, if you go ahead and go to the next one, please.
Well, much like the rest of the state, teaching and learning through COVID-19 has been an opportunity for growth. It's been a chance to become better and an opportunity to improve. We were really fortunate in that when we were considering a remote learning alternative option for families, we had a technology infrastructure that could really handle that challenge. Over the course of the past 7 to 8 years, certainly pre-pandemic, we had put into place a one-to-one technology initiative that put an actual device in the hands of each of our students. And our students were very fluent and familiar with utilizing those technology tools, both in person at school as well as at home remotely. So we have students in grades 6 through 12 who have been issued MacBook computers. And in grades K through 5, they have iPads. We first knew when we needed to transition very quickly to a full virtual experience for our students and staff that internet hotspots and the opportunity for free Wi-Fi were going to be crucial considerations to be able to remedy and rectify and find solutions. So the Last Mile Internet Grant has certainly been a support for us to take advantage of. And then we really utilized regional partners to help us fill that gap, and then also utilized our available resources within the district to supply certain families who needed that level of support with hotspot access in their homes. We were familiar already with a learning management system that transitioned really easily from in-person instruction to either NTI or also remote learning. We utilize the Microsoft Suite, so specifically Microsoft Teams for video conferencing, Schoology in grades 3 through 12, and then Seesaw in grades K through 2 as that main hub of communication and learning and resource database for both students and staff. Now with Microsoft Teams, it was very interesting. We had never utilized a video conferencing software in Fort Thomas schools prior to March 13th of 2020. So it was incredibly important that within a very short 1 to 2 day window, our students and teachers received intense and immediate training in how to utilize that tool so that it could become our one option that was consistent and implemented with fidelity throughout the course of that NTI experience, and then even moving forward with virtual learning and remote learning alternatives this year. For remote learning, we partnered with all of our school leaders and SBDM councils to have site-specific decisions made as to what were the most appropriate virtual programs to offer as a second best option for students and families that elected to not have students return to in-person instruction. And so at the high school and middle school level, grades 6 through 12, we have moved forward with Edmentum courseware. At the elementary school level, our core instruction is coming through Edgenuity Pathblazer, and that is being supplemented with both IXL and MobyMax. At the high school level, we have additional layers of academic support. We're utilizing FEV Tutor in grades 9 through 12, and also AP Classroom for those students in grades 9 through 12 who are in those advanced level courses. We've also personalized and individualized our students' schedules at the high school level so that those students who needed AP access to courses that Edmentum perhaps did not immediately offer would continue to have that, both through coursework opportunities as well as access to AP and advanced level teachers. We've constantly thought through what does personalized learning look like throughout the entirety of the pandemic. And in doing so, we knew we needed to address academic skill gaps that were developing simply in the absence of like a normal school experience. And so IXL has really been an investment that we have taken advantage of in grades K through 8 to allow students to focus on both enrichment and academic intervention so that all students have the opportunity to continue to make forward progress. We've also partnered with MobyMax, specifically in grades K through 8 for students with exceptionalities so that they have a different layer of support and so that their teachers and that those students can utilize different mechanisms to be able to drive forward progress and also meet certain IEP goals or other individual plans for excellence. We have been analyzing STAR assessment data, which I'll return to shortly, to determine intervention needs. A few of our schools are Title I and obviously offer intervention services in person. So they have also made accommodations for students who are in a remote environment to receive similar services. And then because we've been able to isolate remote learning teachers throughout this experience, we have designated teachers assigned to remote learning students. And in addition to them having classes of whom they monitor, supervise, and interact with, we've also had those persons available to assign on an individual basis to students who just need individual tutoring and specific support. Our individual student acceleration options have really happened by applying advanced track curricula in our designated programs. So Edmentum at the high school level and Edgenuity at the elementary school level. And then also, again, allowing for our remote learning teachers to be able to individualize and differentiate for students in this remote environment so that they get exactly what they need. We have been monitoring academic progress really throughout the entire experience. But when you think about this year in particular, and especially with us being open for the majority of the academic school year, our students in remote learning have definitely had a very irregular and non-normal access to their instruction and to our practice. So we have utilized the Renaissance STAR assessment to monitor their progress twice in grades K through 8. And we're doing that for both reading and math. And we've been evaluating learning loss throughout the entirety of this school year. Most recently, we've done a full-scale analysis comparing fall 2020 to winter 2021, and then also looking back to the last academic school year, so fall 2019 and 2020 winter, to this year's fall 2020 and winter 2021. And here's what we've seen. So in comparing this year's fall and winter, we have percentile ranks for students in grades K through 8 that show mostly double-digit increases at the elementary school level. But when we examined our students' scores at the middle school level, grades 6 through 8, we found that there were mild decreases or somewhat flat scores, especially in reading. we saw significant increases overall when looking at scale scores from the STAR reading assessment. And that was definitely promising when you compared that against our scale scores. So then we went back and we looked at how did our students perform, or how were they performing 1 year ago, 1920, to this current academic school year. And what we saw was that our percentile ranks of students last year in 1920 were higher than those that were depicted in this year's academic scores, really across the board at all grade levels and in both content areas. But those scale scores that derive from the STAR assessment showed much higher numbers this year from fall to winter as compared to last year's fall to winter. So specifically this winter 2021, our students were demonstrating higher levels of accuracy and the ability to respond accurately to the questions that were being prompted to them than we saw even 1 year ago pre-pandemic. We took a look at our grade equivalency levels that the STAR assessment is able to garner, and all of our grade levels across all schools showed higher relative levels of grade level equivalency as compared to where we were last year in particular. We definitely examined student growth percentiles for both reading and math, and here's what we found. At each grade level and at each school, we were above the 40th percentile on average, with the exception of simply one grade level at one school. So really that was an outlier. For us, the 40th percentile when examining the student growth percentile is important because it demonstrates a trajectory and more of a correlation as to 1 year's academic growth. So we already saw in winter 2021 that students were on average showing more or at least 1 year of academic growth. And we know that we still have 4 to 5 months of instruction left to complete. And really, most of our students were actually performing on average above the 60th percentile. So that was important. But I will say that we took a look at the student performance outlook on state assessments. So just like a majority of the formative assessment measures being used across the state, we utilized STAR to determine how would our students potentially perform on the Qpr assessment or the state assessment. And so we found that at the elementary level, there was a significant increase in the rate of proficient and distinguished students from fall 2020 to winter 2021, whereas at the middle school level, the percent of proficient distinguished students did also increase in math, but we saw flat rates of increase and even some decreased scores in reading at those grade levels. So that was definitely something that stood out for us when considering an evaluation of learning loss. And then really to kind of wrap up the teaching and learning piece, we know that we need to respond to student needs. We have been in some regard, and we're planning for our response really in moving forward. And one is really a trend that's been shared throughout the entirety of this presentation today, and that is some form of a summer bridge programming. We recognize that we need to move forward with some initial planning for specifically our remote learning students, those students who have not been in any one of our school buildings since March of 2020 and who will not be returning physically until August 2021. We need some sort of bridge opportunity to bring them back and prepare them for academic re-entry, both from an SEL, a social emotional standpoint, as well as targeted instruction, especially if they're at a transition grade level, to ensure that they're really ready to handle the complexity and the rigor of what is going to be forthcoming in their next series of studies. And then lastly, we're really focused on literacy and mathematics skill practice. And while we want to take advantage of online options, because certainly there are plenty and we've made a lot of investments, we also recognize that we're somewhat saturated, or our students are somewhat saturated in their online lives or having lives online. So we do want to take things offline to the maximum extent possible. So we are researching right now all available options for offline programs, strategies, and ways to engage students in ongoing learning outside of their tablets or outside of their MacBook computers. Tony, would you like to move to the next slide?
Thanks, Bill. The next section that we'd want to cover would be our mental health and social emotional support that we've been offering and want to offer as we continue through this school year and looking forward to 21-22. As is the case with all of the other districts, we wanted to make sure that we are monitoring our health and well-being of our students as well as our employees. So we were fortunate in November to administer the Resiliency Poll, which is an online screener through Terrace Metrics, and it's for students in grades 3 through 12. It's about a 20-minute survey, and each set of stems are normed reference. And with that, we were able to then dig into our data to see where we compared to previous years, as this was our 4th year with implementation. When reviewing the data, we recognized that we had equivalent scores that showed that we had similar results as in person when we gave the survey in past years. So again, the fall 2020 scores did not show the deficits that we anticipated as this survey was administered in person. We did, though, see with our at-risk, our most vulnerable population, that there was an increase or a new trend with ostracism. So we immediately wanted to put into action a plan to make sure that we had opportunities for our students to be engaged. With that, and with all of the survey data, we immediately then looked at our self-harm or anxiety and depression scores. We addressed those students, and our counseling staff, along with our district psychologist, offered appropriate plans that were communicated with the teaching staff as well as our parents to support those students. We did then also offer community resources that were wrapped into those plans. Moving forward, though, we knew that we needed to think about programming for students. And so we immediately looked at our extracurriculars, and we actually weren't offering many, as we were concerned, like many others, of opportunities outside of the school day, following healthy at school, finding teachers wanting to be committed to the after school hours. What would that look like? But we've been able to make that happen. And so with following healthy at school, we continue to increase opportunities for students outside of the school day to make them feel connected. We also use our advisory periods in the middle school and the high school to make sure that the teachers are building relationships with our students. And then furthermore, I know that Bill mentioned a summer bridge program that will focus on reading and math. We also have a summer enrichment course offering that we've had for many years. And in that offering, it may not be content-based in the student's mind, as it may be a cooking class, it may be solving mysteries, it may be a forensics class, but in the end, they are focused on learning and working collaboratively with others. So we continue to have that in mind. We will have that flexible opportunity throughout many weeks in the summer. Typically, those courses are approximately about a week, and they are in a menu option so that students can choose what they would like to then participate in. Then furthermore, we do have a standing relationship with a nonprofit that's very close to us in Cincinnati. It's called 1 in 5, or to reference the website, it's 1in5.org. And there early on, we had surveys administered so that we could have baseline data for the mental health of our staff as well as our students. And so most recently, we've wrapped back around to them to talk about our data that we have. And then we're going to be analyzing that information with our counseling departments as well as our leadership teams to create plans with them moving forward for the future. Specifically right now, we want to make sure that we take an opportunity to focus on teachers, focus on wellness, opportunities for them for mindfulness. And so if you are curious about these, I know that there are toolkits that are listed for principals and teachers that could be a certain resource that you may find of value. Then we look to make sure that we also are considering our students' programming. And so looking at peer-to-peer options that we can incorporate for the next school year. And those have been discussions with our leadership team. And then finally, we look forward to then adding mental health priorities to our professional learning plan. Certainly, it's not solidified at this point, as we still need to grow and determine what our 21-22 professional learning plan will entail. Will we be virtual? What will the platform be? But we want to make it a priority to continue the work that we've already started. And at the beginning of this previous school year, we were actually all trained Qpr through our 1 in 5 partnership. So looking at suicide awareness, talking to teachers about how to handle students who may need additional supports. And so at this time, we do feel like we are going to have a general mental health 101 module that will be mandatory for all employees, certified and classified, and that they will participate in that, have the supports necessary to be moving forward to help those in need. And then we also do want to consider the Qpr training for our students, thinking outside of the box, having them support each other, and how to respond if a student comes to them wanting to ask questions more so about self-harm. How do they react and what should they do with their next steps? And then finally, or furthermore, we plan to administer the Resiliency Poll again in the fall of the 2021 school year, and we'll start the process over. So this is a continuous cycle as we look at our community partners to make and build the supports for our students in need.